Leviathans have been a scourge on democracy ever since their addition to the game, being both the tankiest enemy and the most deadly of all three factions with the least amount of counterplay. It's easy to see why the community feels this would be challenging addition to the game is more of a public nuisance. So, what exactly has led to the Leviathan becoming public enemy number one? Well, when it was introduced during the invasion of Super Earth, its threat was greatly mitigated by the fact there were giant skyscrapers everywhere to prevent its instant death beams from locking onto your squishy meat body. Couple that with its very modest explosive radius and poor accuracy, and you were able to outmaneuver them fairly consistently at the very least, breaking line of sight more often than not. Well, unless you were piloting a walker or an FRV, which were basically unusable on any mission where the Leviathans were active. Another common issue with the Leviathans came up during rocket defense missions, where they were able to destroy your generators from vast ranges with very little counterplay. Overall, these concerns were minor, and Leviathans were quickly made to no longer target your generators soon after their introduction. Unfortunately, following that change, a much more controversial one followed soon after. The direct damage of the projectile itself fired by the Leviathan was reduced from 1500 damage to 350. Arrowhead said this was to make the Leviathan less lethal against vehicles. On the surface, this sounds just fine. But the problem began with this change also greatly increasing the radius of the explosion the projectile produced. This explosion also being very capable of ragdolling you. It was no longer possible to outmaneuver the incoming rounds from the Leviathan on foot, or at the very least, it was made much more difficult. Helldivers 2, of course, having its very touchy relationship when it comes to ragdolling, it's obvious why this become a top commented and complained about issue when it comes to the enemy's design. And don't get me wrong, it's fine for enemies to be powerful. I mean, who are we to complain when we're capable of calling in nuclear bombs in 30 straight seconds of hellfire? But the problem really became apparent, though, when the cities were no longer the only maps we were engaging the Illuminate on. In urban maps, you don't have the same ability to break line of sight with the Leviathan. And even if you do manage to put a building between you and it, chances are pretty high its cannon can destroy that building instantly, unlike with city maps. This led to mounting frustration when it came to dealing with these things, especially when playing at difficulty 10, where it wasn't uncommon to see 3 to 5 of them active at the same time.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
With Leviathans also being the tankiest individual enemy in the entire game, it was a pretty tough sell for the Helldivers. To address these concerns, however, several patches regarding Leviathans have rolled out since then, with a new patch even coming out today, just in time to make me revise this entire video. The first of which added a light that clearly indicates you're being targeted by the Leviathan in an attempt to give you a chance to respond before it nails you. The problem with this, however, was you'd often just get ragdolled and die anyway, even if you avoided a direct hit. And your ability to avoid the gun at all was dependent on its position relative to you, making some deaths from above completely unavoidable. Even with the reduced range, spawning in 5 of these things at a time was sure to leave Helldivers with a sour experience. In today's patch, though, another second of delay was added to Leviathan cannons in an attempt to make more counterplay available, and the ragdolling effect of the blast radius has been completely removed, meaning only direct hits are certain to lead to your death now, making the Leviathan significantly more fair to engage with. To top off today's patch, they've also made the previously indestructible cannons destructible with AP4 and above weaponry. Currently, they are speculated to have 100% durability, however, and 1500 health, which still makes it plenty challenging for this class of weaponry to destroy them regardless, except the anti tank emplacement, which can destroy the cannons in 2 shots each. Although this does mean reserving a stratagem slot for this and being a sitting duck while attempting to do so. Lastly, they've reduced the spawn rate of the Leviathans from its previously ridiculous count. These are all good changes, and honestly, I'm looking forward to seeing how they affect the general consensus on this enemy going forward. Getting into the anatomy of the Leviathan, though, it's covered in Class 5 armor, meaning anything smaller than a railgun is initially completely ineffective. And the railgun itself isn't really an option due to only dealing 65% of its damage and being pretty bad against the rest of the faction. Meaning anti tank weapons in general are the only personal weapons that are going to really leave a dent on this thing. And you don't really want to bring them either due to anti tank being widely unnecessary against the rest of the faction. This alone makes Leviathans feel really out of line with the faction design. Going all the way back to Helldivers 1, the Illuminate faction has always been the lightest armored faction to give lighter penetrating weaponry a platform to shine on. Until the Leviathans were added, this was also the case in Helldivers 2, with high RPM, class 4 penetrating and below weaponry really standing out against the overall faction design compared to the usual anti tank based gameplay you find very commonly against both the Terminids and the Automaton elite units. And keep in mind, even with anti tank being very powerful and preferential against the Automatons and Terminids in a lot of cases, all of their heavies have at minimum class 4 armor weak points to exploit without needing to be broken open, making the Leviathan an even greater outlier, especially when we start to look at these health pools, where it really starts to look like a pre 60-day plan kind of design. While you can, as we already talked about, destroy the guns now, the previous go to method for disarming Leviathans was to destroy the front fins, which have 5,500 health and class 5 armor, making them destructible in 2 shots from a recoilless launcher. If you disarm a Leviathan, it's typically even better than destroying it, as it'll float around ineffective until it eventually leaves the map. But if you destroy the Leviathan, you're more likely to just see a new one pop up seconds later due to the spawn no longer being occupied. The vertebrae from the front to the back of the Leviathan have 7,000, 5,500, and 5,000 health, with the tail possessing only 3,900. None of these spots are fatal if destroyed, however. This is the same story with the fins past the front, where the weapons are located, which have 5,000, 3,900, and 3,000 health at the back, although destroying a fin will reveal the interior. This is the same story when destroying the warp disk at the front of the ship, which will also reveal the interior 15,000 health pool that only has class 4 armor. All hits to the Leviathan deal full damage to this health pool, and it's what actually causes the enemy to be destroyed, making breaking open a fin or a warp disk, then blasting it with class 4 heavy penetrating weaponry a viable strategy, but still not an ideal one, as outside the anti material rifle, the class 4 weaponry we have access to have some degree of damage fall off, and will still only be dealing 65% of their damage, making exposing these weak points feel pretty unrewarding. And it's kind of a toss up if you'd be better off just aiming for the guns now. Basically, if you take all of this information into account, we come to the conclusion there are very few comfortable or ideal ways to actually dispatch Leviathans, and even disabling their guns or front fins takes multiple anti tank shells. With them being airborne as well, it's very difficult for our stratagems to really even contend with this tanky flying enemy. As far as avoiding Leviathans altogether, viable tactics include using smoke, which will force the Leviathan to untarget you until you leave the smoke screen, perfect for getting objectives like terminals and flag raising completed while under pressure. The other option being the bubble shield, which will block incoming fire for a short duration, especially now that the rate of fire from the Leviathan has been reduced. The best answer by far for Leviathans, though, is to simply not play operations that have them as a mission modifier. You get absolutely nothing extra for dealing with them, and as far as modifiers go, they are by far the most out of line, similar to the original gunship spawn rate dilemma of yesteryear. All in all, I feel the Leviathan is very out of place from a core design perspective for the faction it's in, and would like to see lower penetration weak points become more viable to keep it in line with how Illuminates otherwise play. I strongly believe this faction should remain focused around health pools and shield technology, not heavy armor, as it's one of the only things keeping loadouts and gameplay diversified when it comes to Helldivers 2 in general. There simply needs to be a faction where machine guns and non anti tank weaponry shine and feel good to run, and the Leviathan is certainly a step away from this. Regardless of that, though, the current state of the Leviathan is in a tolerable position. No one's going to argue the Illuminate didn't need more threatening enemies when they had the diversity of a difficulty 3 mission on difficulty 10 for half a year. So while we do need more challenging and imposing enemies like the Leviathan, the design itself just feels all wrong for the job. Where are the Illuminates cloaking enemies or their elders with psychic powers? They invaded Super Earth with none of the tactics they're really known for, instead opting for a big piece of flying metal that just feels out of character compared to the much more interesting and more nuanced difficulty we saw from the Illuminate design in the first Galactic War. But I don't want this to be misconstrued as a hate rant on the game. This critique is just that, a critique and opinion about enemy design mixed with information regarding said enemy design and notably current viable counters and strategies for dealing with said enemy. Many of you have probably also noticed content on my channel has slowed down in cadence as of late. This is because I want each video I make to feel like it provides sufficient value for your time, and I've typically been making content on other games between Helldivers 2 releases due to its slowdown in release schedule. This time, however, there hasn't really been anything that's really roped me in for the time being, so we're sticking to a schedule of about one video per week until the next big release. Although I do currently have my eye on Jump Ship, which is a 4 player co op space exploration game where you disembark into a co op shooter. Its demo showed a lot of promise, and I'm looking forward to covering its full release sometime in the near future. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and comment so I know you're interested in my continued coverage of Helldivers 2. Thank you for watching till the end, and thank you to my coffee supporters who help keep the channel going. I'll see you next time.